A warm welcome to Tomorrow Today and a special, very special show. We're here at the German Aerospace Center in Cologne, to be more specific, at the Astronaut Training Center for the European Space Agency. And the reason that we're here is because we have a very special guest today, someone who has done something that many of us have dreamed of, but few have achieved. I'd like to welcome astronaut Alexander Gerst. Thanks for joining us here on Tomorrow Today. Now, you went up to the ISS last year for 6 months and became something of a media star, not least because you used social media to explain to people down here on Earth both sort of the spectacular aspects of spaceflight, but also some of the unspectacular things of what it means to just live on the ISS. The mission was called Blue Dot. That's based on the pale blue dot that was a picture taken from the Voyager 1, billions of kilometers away. It wasn't really a blue dot in your world. It was more of a big blue ball. Do you still dream about that big blue ball at night?
Actually, you're right. We were very close to that big blue ball, close enough that it pretty much covered half of the horizon, and of course leaves an impression anyways if you see Earth from the outside. But I have to admit, coming back to Earth was actually disappointingly easy. I climbed out of that capsule and everything was like it was before, and so
there was some letdown.
Kind of felt like a dream that I had of being in space. Now it's quite distant to me, so I rarely dream about being up there.
I mean, it's easier to come down than it is to go up. I mean, maybe there's sort of a philosophical lesson there.
Actually, it's easier to go up and live in space. It's much easier on your body. When you come down, it's quicker and gravity helps you, but as soon as you have to walk, you will realize that you have not been used to gravity for 6 months and it takes its toll. Even though we now are in a position where up there on space station we train a lot, so I actually gained muscle mass while I was up in space. That was one of the I'm kind of belonging to the first generations of astronauts that come back with more muscles than they go up with, which is really good and really helps you when you climb out of that capsule. But nevertheless, you have to relearn how to control your body, how to tell your arm to move up against that weight of gravity, because you're not used to that anymore.
Well, let's move away from the body quickly and talk a little bit about the mind. It's such a different perspective on the planet than any of us have. Did it change your perspective in life going up there and coming back?
Yeah, that's exactly the right way of putting it. It did change my perspective. And since perspective is a big part of every human being, yeah, I have to say it changed me as a human being. Seeing Earth from the outside really changed my view on what our planet is. I mean, I think everybody knows that when you grow up here down on Earth, you don't spend much thought about what this place is. It's just there. You take it for granted. It's huge. It appears infinite. The atmosphere is infinite, and all the resources on it appear to be never ending. Now, when you see that from the outside, that drastically changes. So you see that this place is small, like weather systems span a quarter of a globe. You realize this is a place that's finite. You can run out of things on there. Like every resource that you have on there, you can run out of.
Is it fragile too? I mean, you always hear about this thing about fragility. It seems so fragile from space. That's what astronauts often say.
The atmosphere, when I saw it for the first time, it was a shocking feeling to see how thin it actually is, what a slight fog that is only on the surface of this huge planet. Well, let me go back. It's not a huge planet, but on the surface of this planet, you have this slight fog only, and that's all there is. And
between us and the darkness of space.
Yeah, and you realize this is fragile. You can actually destroy it, and even more so. And that's kind of gave me a sense of urgency and also the urge of sharing this, is that we are able to destroy this accidentally, without wanting it, just by not taking care of it. We could go beyond the point of no return on our ecosphere, on our biosphere, without realizing it before it's too late.
You just mentioned something. You said, you know, I'm a geophysicist. You're also a volcanologist. Were you a scientist first and an astronaut later? Did it come together? Which came first, astronaut or scientist?
Yeah, I don't think there is a difference. I was always curious. When I grew up, I always wanted to find out what Earth is like how it works. Earthquakes, volcanoes, storms, the solar systems, dinosaurs. For me, that was all one. That was my surroundings, how it came to existence, how it works. And that was the reason why I became a scientist. I became a geophysicist not because that was the only thing I ever wanted to do, but at some stage I had to choose, and so the choice fell to geophysics at that time, but it could have been also biology, physics, chemistry. It was all interesting to me. And now, to me, being an astronaut is just a logical consequence of going a step further, not looking only at Earth from the inside, but also the surroundings of Earth. So I just feel like I can use this to be more curious about what's around us and put some more light in that darkness. So that's just a logical path for me.
Right, well, light in the darkness. We're going to be back with you in just a moment, but first, quick impressions from Alexander Gerst's time in space there. Let's take a look at how much training went into putting him up there.
By the time astronauts get to stand on these steps, they've had to go through some of the toughest training and examinations. They go through numerous tests to prove they're physically and mentally fitter than the rest. Alexander Gerst had to go up against 8,400 other candidates. The training for his mission on the International Space Station, the ISS, took him around the world. At NASA's legendary Johnson Spaceflight Center in Houston, Alexander Gerst was shown around the American modules of the station. And he was also shown the technology.
That's brought in there, any ORUs that you guys are going to be working with.
All astronauts need to know how things work because when something breaks in space, they have to fix it. In Cologne, Gerst practiced docking Europe's automated transfer vehicle, a cargo spacecraft. It was to be one of the highlights of his mission. During his training for construction work on the ISS at Russia's Star City, home to a military space training center, Alexander Gerst felt as though he was already in space. He had to slip into an awkward special suit and practice important hand movements underwater in a massive tank. It took 2.5 years to prepare for his mission. They even trained for exceptional circumstances and emergencies such as fire. Because when astronauts set off on a mission, they have to be ready for every eventuality.
So wow, that looks like an incredible amount of work that you had to go through.
6,000 hours.
6,000 hours. I'm just curious, what was hardest? What was the toughest aspect of the training?
Mentally tough was learning Russian in 3 months.
Wow.
That was from scratch, and that was pretty tough.
Have you managed to retain it? Can you still speak Russian?
Yeah, actually much better than even at the end of those 3 months. That kind of just gave us a kickstart. But then I trained in Russia. I spent a year of my life pretty much there, if I add it all up. And then, of course, on the space station with our Russian crewmates, we talk in Russian with the control
centers. Did you speak more Russian or more English when you were up there?
I guess more English because I worked on the European American side. Mm-hmm. But of course, when you fly up there in a Soyuz capsule, the Russian rocket and the Russian spaceship, all the communication with ground is in Russian, so you have to know it well.
Yeah. In the crew, just briefly, the political aspect of it. I mean, all of these things happen here on Earth. All of these dramas, difficulties, political problems. Do they get transferred up into space too?
That's very simple. I mean, you see that stuff from space. You can actually see war from space. I mean, one day we looked out the window and we saw dots moving and exploding in little flashes, and we realized then only that we were over Israel and Gaza, and that people were actually killing each other, and we saw that. Now, if you see that from above, it's very simple because it's grotesque. You look at this and you realize, hey, at some stage, if there would ever be life visiting us from another part of the universe, this is the first thing that they would see. Like us killing each other, us destroying the Amazon forest, which is also very, very visible from above. Mm-hmm. How do we explain to them what we do? How would we explain to them that we call ourselves intelligent life, but by destroying our only home that we have?
So
that is something that you see from above and that you see no matter where you're from. One thing that I realized is the transformation of the definition of your home region. In Germany we call it Heimat. At the beginning it's kind of the region where you grew up, the little forests around your hometown. Then you move somewhere else, you travel a lot, suddenly it's maybe your home country, that's your home. And then in consequence of that, the same happens when you go to space. When you see your planet from the outside, suddenly your home is not that little region anymore, but after a while it transforms. You realize, my home is that planet. So with your crewmates, you're in the same boat. You're away from your home. You leave politics behind. You leave that behind, your friends. And that's another thing. I mean, we know each other since years before we fly together, right? We spend time in the Russian forest, survival training at minus 20 Celsius, without a tent, without a sleeping bag for several days. That kind of bonds you because you have to go through that together and as a crew. And so, yeah, you leave that politics behind. Your friends, you get that feeling of being from that planet. It's a feeling of us.
Well, that's another question. I mean, you're all living together up there in very, very, very close quarters. You're seeing each other all the time. You're rebreathing each other's air. It doesn't get any more intimate. Tell me a little bit more about the day. How do you manage to get through that daily process, living so close with other people? Do you have certain regulations? Do you have downtime?
Well, you describe it as if it was a very hard thing, but actually, if you think the space station is as big as a Boeing 747 in the inside, and there's 6 people there, so you have a lot of space actually. And it happens that half a day you work in the module without seeing the others. You actually miss talking to a person, so you're actually looking forward to seeing them at lunch and just talking about how the day is going. And we all had the same humor. That was kind of luck. I mean, we couldn't plan that ahead, but we had really good times up there, just making jokes and going through the day like that. So it didn't feel hard to be up there. You work hard, of course. You work like a 12, 13-hour day. You do a lot of science, but it doesn't feel like you have to push through every day. No, I really enjoyed being there.
Well, that's one of the big issues, I think, when they talk about, for example, a journey to Mars. People, would have to be together in any ship going there for months and months and months. And the question of what kind of psychological makeup should happen with the crew. I mean, does that all happen beforehand in your training, or if you were to take a journey to Mars, for example, would you be able to go with the people that you were with on the ISS?
That was actually one of the things that I told my 2 friends before we departed after landing. I said, hey, if I ever need to choose somebody to fly to Mars, I would choose you too. And that is totally serious. And you're right, that happens before you fly, that happens in training. You need to kind of have the right personality, of course, to be tolerant, and so you can fly with anyone, but with certain people it's even better to fly if you have the same sort of humor, the same sort of understanding of life. Yeah, I think that's an important thing. Before you go to Mars, you choose your crew wisely. That will happen. And of course, you want to keep your crew also busy. You want to give them something to do on the way there. You can do science that we need to do in space anyways to keep our technology advancing. That's very important for us down here. I mean, all the experiments that I did on the space station, they're all there for improving life down here on Earth. And there's very concrete examples of that. And you will also do that on the way to Mars, of course.
Yeah. Would you go on a mission? If you were selected for a mission to Mars, would you go?
Yeah, of course. You don't have to ask that question to any astronaut. They will always say yes, certainly. Mission to Mars will be the next great adventure of our time. If you think about it, humans are explorers. Since hundreds of thousands of years, we explore every corner of our Earth. As soon as we learned how to build ships, we took them and didn't only sail to the next island, we sailed over the horizon. And now, since 50 years, imagine that. Since 50 years we are capable of doing spaceflight. We're at the beginning of this new period, this new era in human history, and we're about to go on these adventures. There's nothing going to stop humans of doing that.
There are no horizons in space.
That is right, but there's mental horizons. We talked about the blue dot perspective, of the perspective of our Earth from the outside, and how that transforms us humans seeing that from the outside. So maybe the next boundary, the next mental horizon, if you want to say so, might be to go somewhere where we don't see that blue dot with our naked eyes anymore, where our human eyes look up in the sky and our home is gone. We can't figure it out where it is. That is going to be a strange feeling, and something that we can probably learn from, because it even more so gives us an understanding of who we are in space and how significant we are for the universe, which is zero. But it gives us an understanding of how significant this planet is for us, which is everything, because it's our only home and we don't have a plan B.
Alexander Gerst, I'll be back with you in just a moment. Mars, of course, would be a first stepping stone on that journey. Speaking of Mars, although no manned missions are confirmed yet, there's still going to be plenty of unmanned missions going to our planetary neighbor. Lots of different space agencies are sending out probes and satellites. Here's a look at what ESA is doing.
It's the next giant leap for mankind and a dream for many astronauts. Mars. Space probes have shown a world of breathtaking landscapes. The surface is dominated by a huge canyon system featuring steep cliffs that can drop as far as 7 kilometers. Olympus Mons, the highest mountain in the solar system, a volcano that's 3 times higher than Mount Everest on Earth. This capsule, the Orion Multi-Purpose Crew Vehicle, could be just the ticket to Mars for Europe's would-be Mars travelers. It represents an opportunity to be part of NASA's future manned missions to the Red Planet. The Europeans are building a core component for the Orion spacecraft, a service module. Located behind the crew capsule, it propels the spacecraft and provides the crew with water and oxygen. The newly developed transport system is designed for missions that start close to Earth and go deeper into space. Towards asteroids and Mars. Europe hopes to launch a space probe to Mars by 2016. The Trace gas orbiter will investigate the Mars atmosphere and deliver a lander to the surface to test whether a controlled soft landing is possible. Scientific instruments will then be sent on a mission in 2019 to the Mars surface. A Russian research station and a rolling laboratory from Europe. The ExoMars program, as it's called, will try to identify threats and dangers that would pose problems for a manned mission. It will also investigate the biological environment of the Mars surface to look for evidence of former or existing forms of life. The European Mars probe will drill 2 meters into the ground, collect samples, determine their composition, and see if they contain any organic molecules. In Chile's Atacama Desert, scientists and engineers have practiced the mission with this probe. They've tested whether it can find good drill sites and tested its scientific instruments. It's hoped the Orion capsule with the European service module will launch for its first manned mission in 2022. The astronauts will be the first people to have travelled beyond Earth's gravitational field since 1972. They'll probably aim to reach the Moon. They'll remain in orbit for a few days before returning to Earth. One of the astronauts could be a European. All important steps towards what will be the event of the century in space, a manned mission to Mars.
Alexander Gerst, what do you see as the most exciting upcoming ESA mission?
Well, that's a tricky question because there's lots of missions coming up. Of course, I'm interested not only in human spaceflight, but also as a scientist of the upcoming exploration missions. Also in the last year, we had one of the most exciting missions, which was Rosetta, a spacecraft from Earth that traveled for 10 years, for billions of kilometers, landing on a tiny little rock out there in space and finding out for the first time what a comet is made of. We did not know that before. We just found out about that. So it's exciting times. We have missions coming up for Mars, unmanned missions, which you could see as preparation missions for manned landings as well, like this ExoMars program together with the Russian Space Agency. We will send 2 probes out there in 2016 and 18. So that's interesting to see. And of course, the manned program of ESA, we are together with NASA actually building a spaceship, the Orion capsule, which will carry humans out deeper into space that we ever been. Of course, first towards the moon again. This is a stepping stone that we need to get further out in space, but even further. That spaceship is going to be very capable, and I'm really happy and proud that ESA is part of that.
What are the technological limits, though, that are imposed by space travel? I mean, are we getting closer to overcoming them? There's the question of weightlessness, the body, weightlessness, radiation. There's all kinds of parameters that have to be taken into account.
Yeah, that's a very good point, and that's why that's one of the reasons why we have the International Space Station, because up there we actually learn on how to live in space for long. Like we learn about habitability, modules, how can we exchange our atmosphere, renew our atmosphere, technologies for general life support systems, for growing plants in space. We need new materials and all that we test that on the ISS. And I would say we're getting very close to be able to fly out there. As I said before, I'm one of the first generations of astronauts who actually came home with a stable bone density, and we actually gained muscle mass up there, which is a first. And that shows that we are learning on how to live in space for longer. And right now we even have a mission going that's up there for 1 year. So my colleagues Scott Kelly and Mikhail Kornienko, they're trying out how it is to live up there for a year and see if that is feasible. And I think we can do it. Like from my own experience coming back, I felt I could have stayed longer up there in space, no problem.
Do you think that you have to be a certain personality type to be an astronaut? Is there a stable personality type? I mean, I'm sure that there's the selection process, which we heard about earlier. It goes on and on and on. Is there a specific type of person that's made to go out into space?
Well, I wouldn't say I'm made to go out in space, but one thing you need to have is kind of patience. Well, let me go back. I wouldn't describe even myself as a very patient person. I would say one thing you have is being determined, that if you start a project, you don't want to drop it halfway through just because it gets tough. Also, you need to be curious, and of course, at some stage a little bit ready to suffer in training to get to your goal. Yeah, and I think it does help if you're reasonably stable, if you can deal with maybe disappointments which you have on a mission, like our spacewalk was canced
well,
sometime
communication
between.
too. I mean, you have to be able to talk to each other and interact with each other in a way that's going to be sort of fruitful for everyone involved. I mean, especially if you're living in that kind of an environment, right?
Yeah, no, it is very important, not only to your crewmates, but also you have to communicate with the ground centers, with the scientists. Also in training, you have to communicate to various people on different levels. And yeah, I guess that's a very important thing.
You know, I spoke to Thomas Reitinger once, your colleague, and I made the mistake of referring to him as a former astronaut. And he corrected me and he said, you know, once you're an astronaut, you're always an astronaut. You're an astronaut forever. Going into space is an experience that changes you fundamentally. You never go back. You are, from that moment on, an astronaut. What do you think?
Well, I would say in a way, everybody of us is an astronaut. Our spaceship is just a little bit bigger. It's Earth. But if you see that from the outside, you realize that this is just another spaceship with a life support system that's bigger, but one that can break, and it's our only spaceship, and we travel around the sun with it in that spaceship once a year. So it's something that we need to keep in mind, that we humans can be a passenger on that spaceship or part of the crew. That's how I see it.
A passenger or part of the crew on Spaceship Earth?
Yes.
You know, you're certainly a member of the crew. Thanks very, very much for being with us together here on the show, Alexander Gerst. That's all we have time for now. but of course we'll be back again for more about the exciting world of science here on the tiny blue dot. Check in again with Tomorrow Today next week. Bye for now.